Welcome to the Eastern Townships Resource Center's tutorial on describing your archival materials using the Eastern Townships Archives Portal. The Eastern Townships Archives Portal, or ETAP, was established in 2016 as a multilingual, multi-repository, online archives management database for archival institutions situated in the Eastern Townships of Quebec. You can access the database by going to townshipsarchives.ca. Funding for the establishment of the database was provided by Library and Archives Canada, and it's now managed by the Eastern Townships Resource Centre. The database currently hosts archival descriptions for the Eastern Townships Resource Centre, as well as its regional partners, on an access to memory or AtoM platform. The database facilitates the regional sharing of archival descriptions across institutions. This tutorial will teach you how to describe your institution's archival materials using the Eastern Townships Archives Portal. Before we begin, make sure that you're logged in with an authenticated user account with administrator or editor privileges so that you can make the changes that we'll discuss in this tutorial. We'll begin by discussing how to create an authority record. So to begin, we're going to create an authority record. So the first thing you need to do is click the plus symbol at the top of the page, which is for add, and then we're going to select authority records. So the first area of description that we're going to look at in the authority record is the identity area. So a couple of things to note about the authority records and about access to memory in general. Mandatory fields that you need to fill out in your authority records or descriptions are indicated by an asterisk, so type of entity and authorized form of name in this case. So first, for the type of entity, we're going to select whether it is a corporate body, a family, or a person. So for this example, we'll say that it's a person, and the authorized form of name is the name of the person, the corporate body, or the family that you're describing. Your institution may have a certain order that you put this in, so sometimes names are inversed with last name first and then first name second, or you may put them in order. It's as you wish. So for this example, we'll call it simply John Doe. Parallel forms of name, this is not a mandatory field, but you could use it, for example, if you have a corporate body with a name in English and in French, you could put the name in French in this field. You could also use other forms of name. This is good for maiden names, for pseudonyms, for nicknames that are commonly used for people, but neither of these are mandatory fields. So those are the fields that you need to fill out in the identity area of an authority record. The next area of description that we'll be filling out on the authority record we're creating is the description area. So the fields that we need to fill out here are indicated with the asterisk. So we need to put in the dates of existence, in this case for the person. If you'd like to see how to enter the dates, in the user manual for the Eastern Townships Archives Portal, we have Annex A, which gives you different forms of dates that you can enter. So you can see whatever fits what you're doing. And the other field that we want to fill out here is the history. So something to note in the authority records, when you click on a field, this little box will pop up next to it. That gives you the ISAR rule for that particular field. So it tells you what you should fill in for that field. So in this case, it's a record in narrative form or as a chronology of the main life events, activities, achievements, and or roles of the entity being described. And you can include various information here that they suggest. They also suggest to supply dates as an integral component of the narrative. So you can indicate that they worked at a certain place or lived in a certain place from this date to this date. So those are the only areas that you absolutely need to fill out in your authority records on ETAP, but we'll just discuss some of the other areas within the authority record. So there's the relationships area. Here you can indicate relationships between the entity that you're creating the authority record for and other authority records or existing resources such as phone or collections on ETAP. So you would click Add New and you can make those relations. But again, it's not required. Similarly, the access points are also included in an authority record, so you could choose subject access points from the controlled subject taxonomy, similarly place access points from the place taxonomy, and you can include occupations in the access points. And finally, you have the control area here, which is all information about the authority record itself. So when it was created, who created it, revision, the language it was written in, things like that. You'll notice that the authority record identifier is indicated with an asterisk, which would normally mean that it's mandatory, but in the case of ETAP, it is not mandatory to include an authority record identifier. So that's everything that you need to include in your authority record. So once you're finished filling everything out, you just hit create and your authority record will exist, and then you can link it to collections and fonds and whatever other levels of description you create. So now we're going to learn how to add a top level description for a fonds or a collection. So to do so, you're going to click on the plus symbol at the top of the page, which is add, and then we'll select archival descriptions. This is the same way you would do it no matter what level of description you're creating, but for this first example, it will be a top level. So the first area of description we'll look at is the title and statement of responsibility area. And the first thing we need to include, which is indicated by an asterisk since it's mandatory, is the title proper. So this is the title of the fonds or collection you're creating. In this example, we'll call it the John Doe Fonds, oops, with an S. Otherwise, the next thing that you should include in your top level descriptions is a title note on the source of title proper. So this will indicate where the title that you gave the fonds or collection came from. And then within the title note, you can just indicate where it came from. So in this case, the title is based on the contents of the fonds. The next thing we should include is the level of description. So in this case, it's a fonds, but if you're describing a collection, you could indicate that, or you have all of these other options for the level of description. So we'll just select fonds. You should include the repository. So this is one of the cases where you have a type-in box with a drop-down list below. So it's very important that you select whatever you're choosing from the drop-down list instead of typing something in completely and hitting enter. Because what happens when you type something in completely and hit enter, or if you click outside of the box when you've already typed something, is it creates a duplicate record or a new record for whatever you've typed in. And then this has to be removed because otherwise the materials that are linked to one will not be connected to the materials linked in the other. So in this case, we don't have a lot of options. So we can select the Eastern Townships Resource Centre. Otherwise, if we didn't see what we were looking for in the first place, you can start to type it in and your results will slowly narrow, and just make sure that you select it here. Otherwise, if you click outside of the box right now, I would create a record for EA, which is not what we want to do. And finally, you're going to include an identifier. So this will vary depending on the institution that you're describing for. For the Eastern Townships Resource Centre, it's typically an identifier that begins with a P, or there are a couple of other codes for other types of fonds and collections, and then the fonds or collection number. So we'll just say 400 in this case. So that's everything that you need to fill out in the title and statement of responsibility area. So the next area of description that we'll be looking at is the dates of creation area. From here, you have to click Add New to add a new date. And the first thing that you're going to enter is the actor name. So this is linked to the authority record that you created in the first part of this tutorial. So if you see it in the drop-down box immediately, you can select it, or you can start to type it in if you don't see it already. Just make sure that you always select something from the drop-down results rather than creating something new, or you'll be creating a new authority record. If you haven't already created the authority record for the person, family, or corporate body that's responsible for the collection or fonds you're describing, you should go create that authority record first and then come back and create your top level description so that your collection or font is not orphaned without a creator. So I'll just select one for the sake of this example. And the other thing that you need to include is the date or date range. So you can include simply a year, and you see that the start and end date automatically populate. This will be the date or date range that covers the entire font or collection you're describing, so make sure that that's accurate. You can also include a range, and you can see that the end date automatically updated when I added in an end date. The one thing to be aware of is that access to memory can sometimes get confused by approximate dates. So if, for example, we have materials that are from the 1980s, but we don't know exactly what year, we might enter it like this, 198-? But you can see that the start and end dates are coming up as the year 198, which is not what we want. So when this happens, you just have to make sure to add in the earliest and latest possible dates for the materials that you're describing. Otherwise, in a date-based search, when a researcher is looking for materials, your materials will not come up because the database thinks that they're from the year 198 if they're searching for the 1980s. So just make sure that you're checking to make sure that your start and end dates accurately reflect the materials that you're describing. And once you're done, you just hit submit, and now you can see that everything is filled out here. The next area of description is the physical description area. This one is very simple. It is just one field that you need to fill out. So this is going to be the extent and the medium of the materials that you're describing. So it may be textual records. This might be recorded in centimeters. So you might have 11 centimeters of textual records. You might also use linear meters. And for example, photographs, you can put the number of photographs and if they're in color or black and white. So just make sure that you're describing all of the materials within the font or collection. And there are RAD standards for how you enter these extents and mediums, so you can check that out within RAD. The next area of description is the archival description area, and this is one of the most important. So the field that we'll focus on here is the scope and content. The scope and content will allow researchers to know what is contained within the font or collection that you're describing. So it's very important that you include this. And according to RAD, the first sentence of your scope and content should include the subject, the place, and the dates. So in this case, we're describing the font for John Doe. So we can say the font, contains information on John Doe, the subject, in Lennoxville, the place, from 1980 to 1989. So we have the dates there. And the second sentence of your scope and content is going to give a sense of what the materials are within the font or collection you're describing. So we'll say that it is comprised of, and here you can think about what you've included in your physical description area to make sure that you're covering everything. So correspondence and photographs. And you can include as much information as you would like in the scope and content. This is obviously not very detailed, so you would want to include some more here. In the case of top level descriptions, you also want to give a sense of what the lower levels of description are. So if we have series within this font, we would mention the names and the date ranges of those series as well. But generally, that's the information that you would include in the archival description area. The next area of description that we're going to look at is the notes area. So you can include all kinds of notes with regards to the font or collection that you're describing, but the ones that we highly recommend that you fill out are these. So first, the immediate source of acquisition. So this is going to indicate how the records came to the archives. So first of all, we can say here, records were donated by Jane Doe in 2019. So that just gives us an indication of when they came to the archives and who brought them there. Other ones that you should fill out, the language of the material. This is again one of these type in drop down boxes, so make sure that you select language from the drop down options rather than typing it in completely. So if we have records in English, you can select English here. If there are records also in other languages like French, we can select it from there. And the other one that we recommend that you fill out, if relevant, are related materials. So this is a good place to link other materials from the same creators, and that can also be across different archival repositories on the database. So this is a good way to make connections across institutions. So this description that we're creating is for the Eastern Townships Resource Centre, but if, for example, the Stansted Historical Society also had a John Doe phone with records from the same person, we could find that phone within the related materials field and indicate that those are related. So this just helps researchers to make connections across institutions. And as I said, there are many other fields that you can fill out in the notes, so you can choose whichever ones are relevant for the phone or collection that you're describing, but those are the ones that we highly recommend you fill out. The last area of description that we'll be looking at for top-level descriptions are the access points. So the access points that we'll enter here are subject and place access points. For the subject access points, this is going to describe the subjects that are covered within the phone or collection that you're describing. And if you're unsure which subject access points to use, because these do come from a controlled vocabulary, you can always check out the subject taxonomy on the Eastern Townships Archives Portal. So you can get to this either from the home page by going to Subjects under Browse By, or from the Browse drop-down menu next to the search bar. So from the subject taxonomy here, you can see all kinds of more general terms for subjects such as agriculture, arts, and culture. And then if there's a little arrow next to the general subject term, you can click on that. Oops. And now you can see some narrower terms as well. So these are all terms that you can apply to your phone or collection level description under the subject access points. So for example, we just looked at agriculture, so we can type that in as well. You'll see here also there are use references. So if you wanted to describe the phone or collection as agribusiness, we recommend that you use agriculture instead. So when this is the case, just make sure that you don't click on the use reference here, but you actually type in or select the subject term that is being suggested. Because if you select this, it's not going to link your phone or collection to agriculture. It will just be linked to nothingness, essentially. So you can choose your subject term here. And then in terms of your place access points, it's the same thing. There is a controlled taxonomy for places as well. So you can just type in or select the place from the drop down here. Make sure that if you are beginning to type something in, so for example here we're seeing all A's, if we wanted Lennoxville, we could start to type that in. But right now, if I were to click out of this box, it would create a duplicate record for just Lenn, Len. If you do that accidentally, it's okay. Just make sure that you contact the ETRC archivist to have it removed, because we don't want to have duplicates anywhere. And if you select a subject term or a place term and then you realize you've accidentally clicked on the wrong one, that's fine. You can just click the little X next to it to remove it. So just like that, they're gone. And similarly, if you've gone through the subject taxonomy or the place name taxonomy and you're not seeing one that accurately represents what you're describing, you can contact the ETRC archivist to ask about adding them in. And once you've added your access points, that's the last area of description that we'll deal with for these top level descriptions. So just make sure that you hit create at the end and your top level description will be created. And this is a good place to note that one thing about access to memory is that nothing automatically saves except for the things that you don't want to automatically save, like when you accidentally type something in and create a duplicate record. So as you're working through a description, and this process can take a long time, what you may want to do is to enter some basic information, for example, the phone or collection name, the dates, and then hit create. And once you've got a kind of skeleton description created, you can go back in and edit it instead. Because what can happen is if your internet connection cuts out, or if for some reason your tab gets closed, if you've been working on something and it hasn't been saved, unfortunately that information will be lost. So just make sure that you are aware of this as you're working through your descriptions. But that's all you need to know for a top level description. So now we're going to discuss how to add lower level descriptions to an existing top level description. So this is for when you're adding series, files, items, or other lower levels to your existing phone or collections. So in this case, we've chosen P220, the Matrix magazine phone. And there are two ways that you can add lower level descriptions. So the first way, from this main phone level description, we're going to scroll down and hit the edit button. If we were adding lower levels to, for example, a series within the Matrix magazine phone, we would select that series description and then hit edit. But for this example, we'll just choose the phone. Just make sure that you're always editing from the level just above where you want to add the lower levels. So here we're going to go to the title and statement of responsibility area, and we'll scroll down to add new child levels. So in this case, since it's a phone that has series below it, we're going to be adding other series. So the first thing that you need to include is an identifier for the child levels that you're adding. So we can say this is series number 008. For your identifier for child levels, you don't need to include the identifier for the levels above it, because that will be automatically inherited because of them being child levels. So this will come out with a reference code of CAETRC P220008, since we've chosen that for our series. Level is the level of description that you're adding. So in this case, it's a series. You shouldn't mix together adding different levels of description at the same time. So we shouldn't add a series and then add an item and add a file, because what's going to happen is all of these will end up on the same level of the tree hierarchy that researchers use to navigate the phone or collection. So at one time you'll want to add all of your series, then from your series you can add your files, and so on. And that's just going to give you the hierarchy that you're looking for. So the other thing we need to include here is a title. So let's say the series that we're adding is for photographs. So we can put a title here. And then the last thing you'll include is the date range. So we'll say they're from 1980 to 1982. That's all of the information you need to add here. And then, as I said, you can hit add new. We could add series 009, and automatically it's going to assume you're adding the same level of description, because as I said, that's what's easiest and what's recommended. So then you just include the other information for as many as you'd like to add. And once you're finished adding your new child levels, you hit save, and those will appear under the level of description you've edited from. The benefit of adding your child levels this way is that you can add many at once. The drawback to it is that you're adding very basic information, so you'll need to go back in and add more information to each of these series level descriptions later. But it's a good way to add in all of your lower levels at once, and then you can add details later on. So like I said, just make sure you hit save, and then you're ready to go. The second way to add new child levels to your phone or collection level description is to go to the phone level or collection level description page, and then scroll down to the bottom and hit the add new button. and just make sure that you're hitting this from the level immediately above where you want to add your child levels. So in this case, if we're adding series, we do so from the phone level. If you're adding files, do so from the series level, and so on. So we'll hit add new. And then as you can see, this is just your blank description template. So you would fill this out in the same way that you filled out your phone or collection level description. So fill in the fields that we indicated earlier. The benefit to adding your child levels this way is that you can add all of the descriptive information at once. So this is nice if you're just adding one lower level, for example, and you want to get it done right away. The drawback, of course, is that this takes longer because you need to fill them out one at a time, but in the end, I think it evens out no matter which approach you take. So in this case, you would fill out all of your information, but for your level of description, you would choose series instead. Everything else is the same. It's whatever information you need to fill out here. And once you're finished, you hit create, and your series will appear below your phone or collection level description. So now we're going to learn how to move a description if for whatever reason it ends up in the wrong place. So in this example, we're looking at a file within the Matrix Magazine phone, and the file is titled Press Clippings. So from this file level description page that we've selected, at the bottom, we're going to click the Move button. And from here, if you see where you'd like to move it immediately, you can select it from the list here. Otherwise, you can type it in. So we might put in a different phone, for example, if you've accidentally created it in the wrong place. I've typed in Mini Bowen, so we have a few different options here, and you can kind of tell what level of description it is based on the identifier. So we're looking for the phone, P006. You can also tell because it has phone in the title here. So if we want to move it directly to the phone, we select that, and then we would hit move here. Or if you'd like to move it to one of the series within the phone, for example, miscellaneous, you'd select that. And at this point, there are no lower levels that we could possibly move it to, so you only have the option to move here or to cancel. Or we can go back to the phone if we've selected the wrong one, and we can choose the right one. So once you've found where you'd like to move it to, you just click move here, and then a dialog box will appear at the top of the page indicating that the move has been initiated. So next we're going to learn how to link a digital object to one of your descriptions. So here we're looking at the file for press clippings within the Matrix Magazine phone. And if we had some digitized press clippings that we'd like to attach to this file, just to give an idea of what's in the file, we go to the file level description. At the bottom of the page, we hit more, and then we click link digital object. So from this page, you have two options. You can either upload a digital object from the device that you're working on, or you can link to an external digital object by entering the URL where the external object is hosted. So you could paste in a URL here and it would link the object that way. Or if you're uploading from your device, you just hit browse. And from here, you could select the file that you'd like to add in, and then you would just click open, and that would upload the file that way. Then once it's selected, in either case, you just hit create, and the digital object will be linked to your description. Next, we're going to learn how to rename a description or to change the slug, which is the URL address that is associated with the description. So from the phone level description here, in this example, we're looking at the Matrix Magazine phone. We scroll down to the bottom of the description and we hit more, and then we hit rename. So on this page, you can see we have the title of the phone. We have the slug, which is the URL that appears up in the search bar here to indicate the description that we're looking at, and we also have the file name for the digital object that's attached. So you have options to update just the title if you uncheck the slug, or you can update just the slug, or both. We can also update the file name if you'd like to change that. So you make the changes in whichever box you'd like to, and then once you're finished, you hit update and your description or your slug will be updated. So the last thing that we'll look at is how to update the publication status of your archival description. So for this example, we're looking at the phone level description for Matrix magazine. And in order to update the publication status, we scroll to the bottom of the description and hit more, and then hit update publication status. So here we can see that this phone description is published, but we could change it to draft if we suddenly didn't want it to be visible to the public. So when it's in a draft, those with authenticated user accounts can see it, but public accounts or researchers cannot see it. So you could change it to a draft, and if you do so, you can also select whether you'd like to update the descendants or not, which means all of the lower levels below the level you're updating. So one thing to note, it's fine to make, for example, a phone level description public without making the lower level descriptions public. This is quite common if you've created a phone level description but you haven't been able to add all the details to the series files or items below it. However, if you make a phone level description public, such as Matrix magazine was, and all of the lower levels are also updated to be public, and then you update the top level description without also making the lower level descriptions drafts, it will cause an error when researchers are trying to look at the descriptions. So they might be able to see the series but not be able to see the phone level description. So this is something that you need to be aware of when you're switching back and forth between published and draft. But once you've decided what publication status you'd like to assign to the description you're working with, and whether or not you're updating your descendants, then you just click update and those changes will be made. We hope that this tutorial has helped you to understand how to create and edit authority records and archival descriptions using the Eastern Townships Archives Portal. If you have any questions about using the Eastern Townships Archives Portal, you can contact the ETRC archivist at etrc2@ubishops.ca or by calling 819-822-9600 extension 2261, and the archivist would be happy to answer any of your questions. We thank you for watching and good luck with your description.